Look at any ancient Roman statue. The senators standing in the forum, the soldiers carved into Trajan's column, the emperors memorialized in marble across the Mediterranean. Every single one of them is standing perfectly upright, shoulders back, spine straight, head held high. Now look around any modern coffee shop, any subway car, any office building. Hunched shoulders, curved spines, necks craned forward like vultures. We spend $134 billion a year in America alone trying to fix our backs, and the Romans spent zero. So what the hell happened to us? The answer involves your chair, your shoes, your phone, and about 2,000 years of terrible decisions. But here's what nobody tells you. The Romans weren't doing anything special for their posture. They simply never stopped moving in ways that our bodies desperately need. And modern science is finally proving just how badly we screwed this up. In 2022, an NYU anthropologist named Scott Williams published a study that should have made headlines everywhere. His team analyzed over 1,600 human vertebrae from populations around the world, comparing spines from before and after the Industrial Revolution. The finding was disturbing. Post-industrial humans have measurably different vertebrae than pre-industrial humans. Our bones are literally compensating for muscles that have become too weak to support our spines properly. Williams blamed it directly on furniture becoming widely available, desk jobs becoming the norm, and physically active occupations disappearing. Our skeletons are remodeling themselves in real time because we stopped using them the way evolution designed. And the bone density data is even worse. A Smithsonian study found that modern humans possess only 50 to 75% of the joint bone density of ancient human ancestors. Cambridge researcher Colin Shaw discovered that ancient foragers had 20% greater bone mass than even early agricultural populations. He compared their bones to modern orangutans in terms of strength. Shaw put it bluntly, there's 7 million years of human evolution geared towards action and physical activity for survival. But it's only in the last 50 to 100 years that we've been so sedentary, dangerously so. So what did Romans do differently? Everything. The average American takes somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 steps per day and sits for 9 to 13 hours. Romans had no cars, no elevators, no desk jobs. The closest modern comparison is Old Order Amish communities who average over 18,000 steps daily. That's roughly what historians estimate urban Romans walked just going about their normal lives, walking to the forum, to the public baths, to the market, to their patron's house for morning salutations. But here's where it gets interesting. Even when Romans sat down, they weren't really sitting down, not the way we do. The most common Roman seat was called a sella. It was a backless stool, no lumbar support, no cushioning, just a flat surface that required your core muscles to stay engaged the entire time you used it. Chairs with backs were called cathedra, and they were considered appropriate mainly for women, the elderly, or people who were sick. The word eventually became cathedral, a seat of authority and power, not a seat of comfort. And when wealthy Romans ate dinner, they didn't sit at all. They reclined in rooms called triclinia, lying on angled couches arranged in a U-shape, propped up on their left elbow. This position engaged the oblique muscles and spinal stabilizers rather than compressing the lower back the way modern chair sitting does. But perhaps the most brilliant posture technology the Romans invented was something most people never think about: their clothing. The toga was an unfastened woolen garment that could be up to 5.5 meters long and nearly 3 meters wide by the imperial period, and it was held in place entirely by its own weight and the wearer's upright posture. Slouch in a toga and the whole thing starts sliding off your shoulder, hunch forward, and it bunches up and becomes disheveled. The Romans even had a word for someone with a sloppy toga. It was an instant social signal of low breeding and poor character. Quintilian, the famous Roman rhetoric teacher, explicitly taught his students that posture and gait were essential skills, right alongside the draping of the toga. Romans called themselves gens togata, the people of the toga, and that toga functioned as a wearable posture corrector that punished bad alignment in real time. But if you really want to understand how the Romans built spines of steel, you have to look at their military. Roman legionaries carried the equivalent of an 8-year-old child on their backs for 18 miles every single day. The writer Vegetius described Roman training in his military manual from around 390 CE. Recruits started by marching 20 Roman miles in 5 summer hours while carrying at least 45 pounds of gear. As they progressed, the load increased to nearly 80 pounds, about 55% of the average soldier's body weight. Think about what that load included. The Larica segmentata plate armor weighed between 15 and 30 pounds. The rectangular scutum shield weighed another 22 pounds. 2 pila javelins added up to 20 more pounds. Then you had the gladius sword, the pugio dagger, the helmet, the sandals, the marching pack with food and cooking gear and entrenching tools, and 2 wooden palisade stakes for building camp. And speaking of building camp, after marching all day and drilling with weapons, Roman soldiers still had to construct a complete fortified encampment every single night. Digging trenches, raising earth ramparts, setting palisade fences. This was a 2 to 5 hour construction project repeated over and over again across every campaign. The combat training was just as intense. Recruits practiced against a wooden post called a palus, using training weapons deliberately made twice the weight of actual combat gear. Every thrust required rotational core power, every defensive stance demanded trunk stabilization behind that massive shield. This wasn't just strength training, it was postural training by necessity. You cannot carry asymmetric heavy loads over long distances in tight military formation without constant core engagement, upright spinal alignment, and disciplined body control. The skeletal evidence proves it. One soldier's remains found at Herculaneum had leg bones reportedly twice the expected thickness. Now compare that to what we do to ourselves. In 2014, a spine surgeon named Kenneth Hansraj published a study that calculated exactly how much force your phone puts on your neck. When you tilt your head forward at 60 degrees, the typical angle for looking at a smartphone, you're placing approximately 60 pounds of force on your cervical spine. That's compared to just 10 or 12 pounds when your head is in neutral position. People spend 2 to 4 hours per day hunched over their phones. That's 700 to 1,400 hours per year of excess force crushing your neck vertebrae. High school students might accumulate over 5,000 additional hours by the time they graduate. Hansraj described it as carrying an 8-year-old around your neck for several hours every day. Forward head posture now affects somewhere between 52 and 73% of young adults, depending on which study you read. Low back and neck pain ranked as the #1 highest health spending category in America in 2016. Higher than diabetes, higher than heart disease, higher than cancer, and 80% of American jobs are now sedentary, up from around 50% in 1960. Software developers sit for 90% of their workday. The typical office worker is sedentary for over 97% of working hours. You've probably heard the phrase sitting is the new smoking. It was coined by Mayo Clinic physician James Levine, and while the comparison has been partially debunked, the actual smoking increases mortality risk by about 180%, while excessive sitting increases it by only about 25%. Here's the math that matters. Only 15% of Americans smoke, but over 31% are physically inactive. The total body count might actually be comparable, but here's something that will really make you angry. Your shoes. Every pair of Roman footwear ever made was completely flat, what the modern industry calls zero drop. The military Caligie sandals had 3 layers of leather with about 60 hand-forged iron hobnails for grip. They were designed specifically for right and left feet, which was unusual sophistication for ancient footwear. And they kept the foot in its natural biomechanical position. Modern conventional shoes have an 8 to 12 millimeter heel elevation for running shoes. Dress shoes and heels can go 15 to 75 millimeters or more. That elevation shifts your entire center of gravity forward. Your pelvis tilts, your lower back arches excessively to compensate, your upper back rounds forward. Your head juts out in front of your shoulders. Studies show that just 5 centimeters of heel elevation significantly alters pelvic tilt, lumbar curve, and sacral base angles. Walking in heeled shoes increases lower back muscle activity measurably, and the effect gets worse as you age. Modern research is increasingly validating what Roman cobblers understood instinctively. One study found that wearing flat minimalist shoes for 6 months increased foot muscle strength by 57%. People just went about their normal activities. A different trial showed minimalist shoe walking was as effective as dedicated foot strengthening exercises for building foot muscle size. But here's where this gets controversial, and some of you are going to disagree with me in the comments. A survey of around 300 European physiotherapists found they could not agree on what ideal sitting posture even looks like. 85% were split between two fundamentally different positions. A 5-year study found that people with classic slouched posture actually had less neck pain over time. Meanwhile, people with perfectly erect posture reported more pain. Another study of call center workers found that the total time spent sitting correlated with back pain. But the actual sitting position did not matter. Duration was the deciding factor, not posture. So what explains this? A tribe in Tanzania called the Hadza might have the answer. Anthropologist David Reichlin studied the Hadza and found something fascinating. They spend about 10 hours per day in resting postures. That's comparable to Americans sitting 9 to 13 hours. But they don't develop chronic back pain. The difference is how they rest. The Hadza spend roughly 2 hours daily in deep squat positions. They kneel. They sit on the ground without back support. These postures require significantly higher muscle activity than chair sitting. Every toddler can deep squat naturally, but chair-dependent adults progressively lose the ability. Reichlin called chair sitting a key mismatch with our evolutionary past. Human physiology evolved to maintain light muscle activation even during rest. This reframes everything about the Roman advantage. Romans weren't standing at rigid military attention every waking moment. They weren't obsessing over perfect spinal alignment. Their environment simply never allowed their muscles to fully disengage. Backless stools demanded core activation. Flat sandals kept stabilizer muscles firing. Walking 15,000 steps daily maintained bone density and joint health. Toga wearing enforced upright carriage in public life. Military training built massive reserves of core strength. Every element of Roman daily life created continuous low-level physical engagement. The exact opposite of the modern pattern where we sit completely passive for hours and then try to compensate with an hour at the gym. The Romans didn't do anything special for their posture. They simply never invented the technologies that are destroying ours. The cushioned chair, the elevated heel, the glowing screen, the automobile, and here's the uncomfortable truth that should keep you up at night. Our skeletons are remodeling in real time to accommodate sedentary lifestyles. The process has accelerated dramatically since industrialization. And it's not going to stop. Your grandchildren might literally have different bones than you do. So what do you do about it? Throw away your chairs, burn your running shoes, move to Tanzania and live with the Hadza? Probably not. But maybe the next time you reach for your phone, you'll think about those 60 pounds crushing your cervical vertebrae. Maybe you'll stand up from your desk more often. Maybe you'll take the stairs instead of the elevator, because the Romans weren't superhuman. They were just human, living the way humans lived for 2 million years before we decided we were too civilized to walk anywhere. And our spines have been paying the price ever since.